Okay, number 169 is called Wall Plaque from Oba's Palace, created by the Edo people in Benin, which is now Nigeria, 16th century, and this is cast brass. There is going to be a lot of notes on this one because it's fascinating. There's just a lot of information on it. It's hard to know what to leave out. So here's context about the place. So Benin is now modern day Nigeria, and the Edo people of Benin had about 400 years of trade with Portugal, which I circled up above, from starting around the 1480s. So they've been trading with the Portuguese. The Portuguese would trade them these brass armbands called manillas, and then the Edo people would then give the Portuguese pepper, ivory, slaves, and leopard skins as their trade goods. This trade with the Europeans actually made the Benin people very wealthy and powerful. And then these manillas, it's important to learn the history of it because this is the brass that they melted down to create the plaques that we're going to be studying. And then they did this using this lost wax process. So what it means is you would sculpt something first out of clay, or not clay, out of wax, like the dolphin on the left. Then you would encase that wax sculpture with clay. So you'd have two sides of the clay so that it could come apart. And then there'd be a tube in the wax or something like that going up. And then you would fire the clay, so it'd have to get hot, and in that process the wax would melt away, so that's the lost wax, leaving the hole of where that sculpture was. So now you have this empty part that you can then pour liquid metal into. So they would melt down those manillas, melt down that brass, pour it into this sort of groove when your two clay pieces are together. The brass would then harden, it would cool, and then you take apart your clay pieces, and that's how you have those brass sculptures. And there's tons of them, so we're going to look at several of them. Overall function, the royal lineage was documented in these plaques. They were placed in historical sequence, and this is important. So the way they were placed actually told the narrative. It told the sequence, and it told the history of the Edo people. And these would be hanging on posts in the royal palace in Benin. Some evidence that we have that these are actually hanging are all the nail holes throughout. So you can see kind of up in each corner, there's going to be holes that these plaques were nailed into the posts. Again, more of the function. So here's several of them. They told sacred stories of the kingdom. They also talked about trade partners. That's going to be the smaller people, are going to be the Portuguese that they're trading with. They depict scenes, battle scenes won by the army of the Beninian ruler, which is the Oba. So you can summarize all this. You don't have to be exact. I'm also giving you these other examples so you can look at different styles, different levels of relief. I say this is pretty low relief, except where there's shadows. That's kind of a higher relief. But look how low relief. First of all, remember, this isn't etched into metal. This is sculpted out of wax, and then the metal is made from that cast. Now you have a little bit higher relief. Look at these feet sticking out. That's really high relief. Everywhere you have a shadow, that's going to be high relief. And now you have full-on arms and staffs and bodies coming out of this flat plaque, showing you high relief. But then there's still the low relief patterning that's on. You can see it here too on the one on the right. All right, context. There's over 900 of these types of plaques. Look how detailed this is. All right, here's kind of an overview of where the royal palace was in this inner walled in section of Benin, kind of just like the Vatican is its own little walled off section. Zimbabwe is its own enclosed royal residence. Same thing here for Benin where the palace was. And then College Board also gives you a contextual photograph that we should be able to recognize along with the artwork. And it's so we can have conversations about the Oba. The Oba is the king. He is in the center. So how can we tell he is the king? How are the artists making him look more important? Which we have a lot of clues from our contextual photograph. So he's in the center. That's going to be number one. Again, there's that hierarchy scale or hierarchic scale. He is bigger than everybody else. That tells you he is more important. He is surrounded by his attendants, sword bearers of lesser rank. So the attendants are the two bigger ones. And then you have the sword bearers, they're lesser rank, so they're smaller. indicated by smaller size. They're all supporting the king's outstretched arms. All right, again, summarize this, you guys. Smaller still, and therefore of less importance, are the two miniature figures who hover in the corners. So these are possibly the Portuguese traders. Symbols of high rank are emphasized. Only the oba was allowed to be shielded in the way depicted in the plaque. Also in our contextual photograph, just printed really dark on your paper. He's also stepping on a fallen leader. It's like supporting his foot. The image of oba in brass shows control and power since it is an expensive and scarce material. Again, this is a common theme, right? You have the Aztecs ruler's feather headdress being made out of a really scarce material, showing power and wealth. Content, again, more of what it's depicting. It's a ceremonial scene at court. It's showing rituals of the king, the oba's court. The oba is the spiritual and the secular leader. He's also covered in coral, and the Edo people would have had control of all the coral. Since they're supporting his hands, we would consider that like a way to assist the elderly, like helping out the weak. This is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. The attendants represent the power of the king and the assistance to his sacredness. Also, there's an emphasis given to the heads, right? They seem larger than everything else. Why do you think the heads are disproportionately large? Why do they all look like bobbleheads? So that's showing the seat of wisdom and intelligence being the most important feature. We're going to see this in some Pacific artworks and more African artworks, I believe, yeah. Some other features that we're seeing that are really common or characteristic are wearing those large rings that cover the neck, just very characteristic of Benin and the Edo people. Leopards, an important symbol on wall plaques, something we're seeing common throughout. You can see the leopard patterning on the skin. Symbol of power. They would trade leopard skins to gain wealth. All right, and then we have these quatrefoils. This is just, or rosette shape and ornamental design. There's the oba. Oh, I wanted to show this because it's interesting to see what we have in our museum in the Nelson. So this is a brass head of a king, of an oba. It looks very feminine, but this is a representation of the oba. Again, coral, and then you have rings around the neck. All right, we are going to listen to the British expedition, what happened. So we're going to listen to this, and then I want you guys to we'll add some notes afterwards.
We fast forward to time and to 1897, and that's where the British punitive expedition takes place. And this is all about oil, palm oil. The British wanted to have a monopoly on the trade in palm oil, and they were competing with the Dutch and with the Germans. And they wanted to get a claim of the Niger Coast Protectorate. And in order to do that, they needed to get trade rights from the Oba of Benin, from the king. And so they were working on them for a long, long time. And the king does eventually sign some treaties under duress. And when the British attempt to enforce them, they get a lot of pushback. Because it's very lucrative. If you're between the coast and the interior, the middleman is always the one making the money. So you don't want to give that up. And as the story unfolds in 1897, the acting consul, a guy by the name of Phillips, decides to go and enforce this treaty. And he approaches the capital and with a small contingency of British soldiers, and he's stopped halfway there, and the army of Benin tells him, this is not a good time, you need to go back, come back another time. And being our kind of prototypical colonial, he's not going to be told what to do by some kind of a savage, so he continues on. He's warned again, he doesn't turn back, and then finally the warriors of Benin fall on his group and kill the majority of that contingency. The survivors flee to the coast, word gets back to London, and they send in the Navy to raise Benin City to the ground. It's gone. It does not exist. The Oba is put into exile, and we have images here of the sacking of Benin, of the Oba's palace. And you can see it's chock full of objects, of art. And that is where
Oh, that is where. All right, so we're going to relate this back. The next piece we're going to talk about is the golden stool, and something very similar happens there as well. So here's kind of a summary. You don't have to write all this down, but do know that all the plaques, remember, they hung in a sequential order. And now when you go to the British Museum, this is what you see, right? They're all taken completely out of context. They're taken out of order. Because of colonialism, because of people going in and taking control and taking what they want. And so now it is no longer there, and it kind of loses the meaning for the people. All right, so there are many who believe that objects such as these plaques should be returned to the people of Benin. However, there are others who feel that these objects are part of the world's heritage and thus should remain in museum collections around the world as a testament to this artistically rich culture. So it's interesting conversations. And if we were in class, we would talk about, where do you stand on this issue? Like we have one of these plaques at the Nelson that sometimes is on view and sometimes is not. And does it benefit us being able to see it? Because a lot of us are not going to be able to go to Africa to see if they were there. Should formerly colonized areas be repaid for the damage inflicted on them by colonial powers? Who is responsible for doing so and how? Who has the ethical rights to the ownership, display, and preservations of these important pieces of cultural heritage? So these are conversations that museums have ongoing today. All right, couple cross-cultural references. I told you that the Oba is stepping on a fallen leader, and then we have Shiva, Lord of Dance. When we get to our Hindu section, he's stepping on a dwarf of intolerance, I believe, which sounds fun. And this is what we have on view sometimes at the Nelson, the plaque, one of our plaques, like it's our plaque.